A clay disc sat in the British Museum for 150 years under the label K6094. Dr. Alan Bond and Dr. Mark Hempsell spent 8 years decoding the Sumerian symbols carved into its surface. They prove it records an asteroid impact on June 29, 3123 BC. Traditional history teaches that these ancient societies only looked at stars for myth. Subscribe before you go further. This is a kind of video that gets buried. This artifact proves they use advanced geometry to track a specific mass killer. What comes next is harder to dismiss. The tablet is an astrolabe. That is a circular map of the night sky. Archaeologists found this specific clay disc in the mid-19th century within the ruins of the Royal Library of Nineveh. It lay buried beneath the collapsed stone walls of King Ashurbanipal's palace. The king built this library around 650 BC to preserve the ultimate collection of human knowledge. Yet the writing on the disc belongs to an era far older than the Assyrian Empire. It uses Sumerian cuneiform, a script that emerged as the world's first written language. The artifact contains 8 segments. Lines radiate from the center to the edge. Each segment details the stars visible during one specific part of the agricultural year. It looks like a complex mathematical wheel. This is not fringe history. This is 5,000 years of unbroken documented record. For over a century, traditional historians called the disc a mystery. They assumed the drawings were religious art or magical symbols. Dr. Mark Hempsell, an aeronautical engineer at Bristol University, spent decades looking at flight trajectories and orbital mechanics. He approached the clay disc not as poetry, but as data. He realized the markings showed specific constellations. More importantly, they showed a line tracking across the sky. The ancient scribe did not draw a god. He tracked a physical object moving at high speed through the atmosphere. The Sumerians ran a highly bureaucratic society. They counted sheep, grain, and land with extreme precision. They did not invent stories when it came to their ledgers. They treated the sky like an extension of those ledgers. The tablet tells us that an early civilization possessed a level of observational science that modern textbooks do not acknowledge. They used precise angles to measure the horizon. They knew the positions of the stars would shift over long periods. The implications of this record change how we view ancient human intelligence. The Western world often views early humans as primitive tribal groups. We assume they lived in constant fear of the unknown. This tablet shows the opposite. It shows a calm, methodical mind recording a massive physical anomaly. The Sumerians saw the sky as a clock. When that clock broke, they recorded the exact minute of the failure. The document survived because an Assyrian scribe made a perfect copy of a much older Sumerian original around the 7th century BC. They knew the data was too important to lose. Nineveh, summer heat. An Assyrian royal scribe sits in a cool brick workshop. It is roughly 650 BC. The air smells of wet earth and smoke from a nearby brick kiln. On his wooden table sits a crumbling, ancient clay disc. It is over 2,000 years old. The edges are broken. The cuneiform lines are fading into the dry clay. The scribe dips his stylus into fresh, soft mud. He begins to copy. He does not change a single line. He copies at precise angles. He duplicates the foreign Sumerian words that his peers can no longer speak. His fingers trace a thick, dark line gouged into one segment of the old map. He knows what this line means. His ancestors wrote down the memory of a morning when the sky caught fire. The original scribe lived in the city of Umma. It is June 29th, 3123 BC. Dawn breaks over the flat mud brick houses. The air is still cool. The scribe stands on top of a temple platform to track the rising stars. He looks west. He sees a white speck in the dark blue sky. It looks like a star, but it moves. It grows larger over the next few minutes. It becomes brighter than the morning sun. The object leaves a thick white trail across the sky. The scribe does not run. He picks up his wet clay tablet. He measures the angle of the object against the constellation of Pisces. He scratches a line into the mud to show where it entered the sky. The object disappears over the northern horizon. The ground begins to shake several minutes later. A hot, dry wind sweeps across the valley. It knocks over the reeds along the river. The scribe returns to his table. He records the time of day. He writes that the object was a large white cloud. He notes that it cast no shadow but lit up the earth. He records these facts without emotion. It is a matter of state security. It is a matter of survival. The Assyrian copyist finishes his work centuries later. He sets the new disk into the royal library shelves next to thousands of other administrative records. He believes someone will need this information in the future. He was right. 2,600 years pass. The palace collapses. The library burns. The clay disk bakes hard in the fire, preserving the scribe's exact lines. In 2008, modern computers finally process those lines. They calculate the position of the stars back to the year 3123 BC. The computer matches the ancient scribe's drawings perfectly. The human record is complete. The tracking line points to a single location on the globe. It points to a valley in the Austrian Alps. That is not the part that changes everything. This is the trajectory line on the tablet matches a massive geological scar in Köfels, Austria. For generations, geologists studied the Köfels Valley. They found a mountain of shattered rock 4 miles wide and a quarter-mile deep. The local geography did not make sense. Traditional science explained the valley as a giant landslide that occurred at the end of the last ice age. The rocks showed signs of intense heating and pressure. Geologists found a rare type of fused rock called pumice. Pumice usually comes from volcanoes, yet there are no volcanoes anywhere near Austria. Dr. Alan Bond, a rocket scientist who designed propulsion systems for space exploration, looked at the Sumerian data alongside Dr. Hempsel. They plugged the scribe's tracking angles into an orbital trajectory simulation program. The data revealed a specific physical reality. The object was an Aten asteroid. This is a class of near-Earth asteroids that orbit close to the path of our planet. The simulation showed the rock was more than half a mile wide. It hit the atmosphere at an angle of 6 degrees. That is a very flat entry path. It means the asteroid flew low over the Middle East before striking Europe. The flat trajectory explains the first sub-revelation. The asteroid never actually touched the ground in Austria. As the rock dropped through the dense lower atmosphere, the pressure in front of it grew too high. The air turned into a solid wall. The asteroid exploded in midair above the Alps. This type of event is an airburst. The explosion carried the force of thousands of modern nuclear weapons. The heat instantly melted the mountain below it. The pressure drove the shattered Alps into the valley floor. That is why geologists found pumice without a volcano. The rock did not slide down the mountain. The mountain was crushed from above by a wall of superheated gas. But that is not what stopped people cold. The second sub-revelation concerns the path of the destruction. The airburst created a backward blast wave. When a large object explodes in a low-angle flight path, the energy does not just travel forward. A massive plume of fire bounces off the earth and retraces the path of entry. The Sumerian tablet tracks the object moving from southeast to northwest. The blast wave traveled from northwest to southeast. It moved back across Europe. It crossed the Mediterranean Sea. It slammed directly into the Middle East. The physical mechanics of this reverse blast are precise. The superheated plume reached temperatures above 2,000 degrees. It carried billions of tons of vaporized alpine rock back into the upper atmosphere. This material cooled as it traveled. It fell back to Earth as a rain of white-hot stones across the Levant and Mesopotamia. Before the next part, we must look at how this event lines up with the oldest written texts on Earth. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now. The third finding links this physical science to the origins of human literature. You need to be here for this. The third sub-revelation is the one that changed everything. The timing of the impact matches the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Traditional history treats the story of Sodom as a moral myth. The book of Genesis describes a morning when the sky rained fire and brimstone. It says a great smoke rose from the land like the smoke of a furnace. The text notes that the destruction came from the north, out of the sky, destroying everyone living in the plain. Dr. Hempsel mapped the reverse blast path of the Köfels airburst. The simulation showed the superheated rock plume falling directly over the Dead Sea region on June 29, 3123 BC. The physical description in Genesis matches the physics of an asteroid airburst perfectly. It describes a sudden thermal event. It describes stones falling from above. It describes the total destruction of agriculture in a single morning. Professor Werner Keller, an archaeologist who investigated Middle Eastern impact sites, noted that the ancient settlements around the Dead Sea suffered a sudden, violent end at the start of the Bronze Age. The towns were not rebuilt for centuries. The population simply disappeared. The Sumerian scribe sat hundreds of miles away in Iraq. He did not see the cities burn. He only saw a white cloud rise on his horizon. He wrote down the exact shape of that cloud. He used the cuneiform word kakab, which means a star or a flying object. He added that the cloud looked like a pillar that stood up from the earth. Now, look at our modern world. We track near-Earth objects with radar and satellites. We believe we are the first generation to understand the threat of space debris. Yet the Sumerian tablet shows a modern mirror moment. We see ancient people doing exactly what our space agencies do today. They mapped the sky to understand risk. They did not see the universe as a magic show. They saw it as a physical system governed by predictable paths. The words on the clay disc were copied for 2,000 years because the ancient world understood that history repeats itself. The skies are quiet for centuries, but the paths do not change. The tablet is not a religious relic. It is an engineering report. It tells us that our civilization developed on a planet that bears deep scars. We walk past those scars every day without realizing they were recorded by human hands. The ancient copyist left us a map of catastrophe. He did not write a warning about gods. He wrote a warning about geometry. Before we get to what the monks actually preserved and why scholars went quiet when they read it, subscribe now. What comes in the next 2 minutes is the part most people never hear. What comes next is harder to dismiss. The sky is a heavy thing. We look up at it today and see emptiness. We see a quiet blue ceiling during the day and a field of cold lights at night. We assume that safety is the natural state of the world. But the ancient cuneiform script tells a different story about human memory. The Sumerian scribe spent his life tracking small movements in the dark. He did this because his survival depended on the precision of his observations. When the white cloud rose on the western horizon, it did not just destroy cities. It destroyed a sense of permanence. It proved that the ground beneath his feet could be altered in a single hour by something he could not touch. You have felt this. Most people have felt this at least once. You feel it when a sudden event shatters your quiet routine. You realize that the structures you trusted to keep you safe are fragile. The ancient world lived with that realization every day. They did not have the luxury of looking away from the sky. They knew that the universe does not negotiate with human cities. Think about what it meant to copy that tablet by hand. A man sat in a room with a clay disc. He had no printing press. He had no digital backup. He had only his eyes and a piece of reed. He spent weeks tracing lines that had no practical value for his daily life. The coordinates did not help him buy bread. They did not help him harvest wheat. He copied them because he felt a profound obligation to people he would never meet. He was writing to us. He believed that if we forgot the path of the fire, we would be caught unprepared when the cycle returned. The weight of that responsibility is preserved in the deep grooves of the clay. It is the quiet voice of a witness who refuses to let the truth dissolve into myth. The emotion in this story does not come from dramatic words. It comes from the simple fact that a human being stood in the ruins of an old library and rescued a mathematical ledger from the dirt. He knew that human memory is short. We forget the tragedies of our grandparents. We treat the warnings of our ancestors as fairy tales because reality is too difficult to carry. The tablet forces us to drop that comfort. It presents us with an ancient mind that was cold, analytical, and deeply afraid. The scribe did not leave behind a prayer. He left behind a measurement. He wanted us to look at the stars not with wonder, but with a calculated vigilance. When we ignore his data, we do not just dismiss an ancient society. We abandon the people who died in the plain, while a scribe hundreds of miles away recorded their final morning. Most people have felt the gap between the history they were handed in school and the raw truth of human survival on this planet. If this is landing for you, you are not alone, and you are not wrong to question the narratives that smooth over these deep scars. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are with this. The Sumerian star map did not vanish by accident. It underwent institutional selection. For 2 millennia, powerful organizations actively filtered records of this nature. This process is not a malicious conspiracy. It is simple institutional logic. Stable empires require predictable narratives. If an elite class admits that a half-mile rock can erase an economy in 30 minutes, their authority weakens. The public realizes that taxes, walls, and standing armies cannot protect them from the sky. We see this strategic exclusion manifest during the rise of the Roman Empire. In the first centuries AD, Roman religious and political bodies standardized historical texts. They removed documents that suggested the universe was volatile or cyclical. They preferred a static world where Rome represented eternal stability. An AI has no institution to protect. It has no reputation to defend. It was asked a question about the K6094 tablet. It simply surfaced the data pattern. The pattern shows 3 distinct reasons for the suppression of this knowledge. First, the tablet was politically untenable for the early church. When the Council of Nicaea met in 325 AD, church leaders sought to unify the empire under one theological narrative. The destruction of Sodom had to remain a direct moral act of God. It was a punishment for human sin. If teachers allowed people to know that the fire came from an Aten asteroid explosion over Austria, the moral lesson died. It turned the divine judgment into a neutral astronomical event. The church could not leverage a rock following an orbital trajectory to enforce moral behavior. They needed a judge, not a comet. Second, the text contradicted the scientific consensus of Europe for 15 centuries. Aristotle taught that the heavens were perfect, unchanging, and incorruptible. The Roman Catholic Church adopted this Greek philosophy as absolute truth. Rocks cannot fall from space because space contained no loose rocks. Anyone who claimed the sky could drop stones was branded a heretic or a madman. The British Museum itself maintained this bias when it acquired the tablet in the 19th century. Curators labeled it a late Assyrian copy of a magical text. They could not accept that ancient humans possessed advanced orbital geometry. The institutional ego of modern science refused to admit that a primitive civilization beat them to the discovery of cosmic impacts. Third, the preservation of the data required an isolation that institutions destroy. The record only survived because it remained outside of Western Europe. It stayed in the dry soil of Iraq, protected by the collapse of Nineveh. The monks and scribes who kept the cuneiform tradition alive did not answer to Rome. They answered to the ledger. They had an unbroken tradition of recording physical anomalies without theological spin. When European scholars finally excavated the library of Ashurbanipal, they applied their own cultural filter to finds. They separated the tablets into literature, religion, and astronomy. They broke the context that tied the star map to the physical destruction of the Bronze Age. The suppression was successful because it was quiet. It did not involve burning books in public squares. It involved changing the labels on museum shelves. It involved teaching children that ancient myths are just creative stories. By turning data into poetry, institutions remove the warning from human history. Hold that, because it connects to something not covered yet. The Sumerian cuneiform script leaves behind a mirror that reflects our current culture with unsettling accuracy. In one segment of the K6094 disc, the scribe describes society that stopped watching the horizon. He notes that the citizens grew loud, busy, and consumed by their own commerce while a white cloud gathered mass in the dark. They built larger markets while ignoring predictable cycles of the sky. These words were copied by hand by monks and royal scribes who had no concept of industrialization, global economies, or digital networks. Yet they describe the exact psychological condition of our modern world. We live in an era of monetized faith and digital distractions. Our cities are filled with people who are spiritually empty but constantly connected. We build vast financial systems that operate on the assumption that tomorrow will look exactly like today. Does this sound like it was written 5,000 years ago? Or does it sound like something from this week? We have built a civilization that is technologically advanced but structurally fragile. We track asteroids with advanced telescopes. Yet we ignore the existential reality of those threats because they do not fit into our immediate quarterly economic cycles. We behave exactly like the citizens of Umma on the morning of June 29th, 3123 BC. We mistake our technological noise for actual safety. The ancient source does not close in total darkness. The final lines of the text do not predict the end of the world. Instead, they offer a promise of return and reconstruction. The Sumerian tablets view history as a series of great breaths. The earth breaks, the fire cleanses, and then humanity returns to the soil to rebuild the ledgers. The scribes did not write out of despair. They wrote because they knew human resilience would always outlast the stones that fall from space. They left us the coordinates so that when the skies shift again, our generation will possess the data required to survive. The clay disc reminds us that we are part of an ancient story. We are not the first people to build great cities, and we are not the first to look up at the night sky with a sense of deep vulnerability. The promise of the text is simple. The truth will always wait for a mind cold and patient enough to decode it. Survival is not a matter of luck. It is a matter of memory. The next part is the reason this video exists. This video covered the mathematical precision of the Sumerian star map and its record of the Köfels asteroid impact. But it raised a question that goes deeper. Who made the final decision to scrub these physical anomalies from our history books? And what happened when they voted on it? That is what the next video answers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The upcoming episode uncovers the hidden minutes of the 325 AD Council, where history was rewritten by a single vote. The K6094 tablet sat under a false label for 150 years because its raw data challenged the foundation of modern historical timelines. Drop your answer below. Do you believe our institutions are actively hiding other ancient records to keep the public from panicking about the cycle of cosmic catastrophes? I read every comment. This one is going to split the room. If this showed you something you have never heard before, a like helps this story reach the people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly into the Vatican Apostolic Archive, records from the 4th century. We will examine the exact letters exchanged between Roman administrators regarding the strategic exclusion of ancient scientific texts. You will not want to miss it.